Hi, and welcome to the Ministry Network Podcast. I'm your host, James Baird. Today, we'll talk with Pastor Alistair Begg. Pastor Begg is a world-renowned preacher and the pastor at Parkside Church for over 40 years. Today, he'll share his advice on how to craft your preaching style and tone. The Ministry Network Podcast is sponsored by Westminster Theological Seminary. You can learn more about their new online programs by visiting ministrynetwork.com/degree. Now, let's hear from Pastor Begg. How would you advise a young pastor who has a desire to lead a church to be a pastor-producing church?
Well, that would never have occurred to me if you'd asked me that in, 1976, 77, 78. I came here in 83. I don't think I even had that in my mind, all right? Except in terms of 2 Timothy, that the same entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So it wasn't something that I would have led with. And it is now sort of, I don't want to say it's kind of trendy, like you're not really doing the job unless you are church planting and producing a tribe along with you. When in actual fact, there is a sense in which, if we leave aside intentionality for the moment, there is a sense in which it's going to happen anyway, because leaders produce followers. And people who have been owned of God and are good at something will become catalysts for those who aspire to that, who will want to come and seek you out. I mean, the worst of the situation is when you want to offer yourself as this great model and nobody's remotely interested. It'd be better to be the other way around, to discover yourself becoming the pastor for developing pastors, than to present yourself as, this is who I am and this is what I do. It's a bit like, let others decide that for you. And, if we look over the years here, the fellow who was the youth pastor when I came has been a lifetime as a missionary in Bolivia and made a phenomenal impact. Others, through the internship process that we bring in and have with us for a while, have gone on to serve God. The members of our pastoral team are in different places around the country, serving in the gospel. And I'd have to say that owes far more to the ability of my own colleagues on the pastoral team than it does actually to my willingness to be doing, if you like, tutorials with them. Now, this is what you need, or this is what I need to see. So in some ways, my model, if you like, models the Derek Prime model, in that wherever he went, I followed him. However he approached a marriage, I took down notes. When I attended a funeral and I saw the way in which he dealt with people, I laid hold of that. I took hold of that. And I was really in an apprenticeship without it being a classroom setting or read this book or do that. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But that would not be true to my personality, because it's just, I would love to have coffee with you, James, and we could talk about pastoral ministry and stuff, and you go on your way. But I don't want to assign you 3 chapters of, Jim Packer's Knowing God, and then you come back and tell me all about them, and then we talk. I have to leave that to others. They're more tutorial in their approach, and I'm more catch it if you can. I don't find that particularly commendable, incidentally. I'm not suggesting it as a good model. I'm just being honest.
I especially appreciated what you suggested there early in the beginning, that developing a church that produces pastors is a bit like the proverbial soap, in the shower. The harder you squeeze it, the less likely it is to actually happen.
Yeah.
It should be an outworking of a good pastoral ministry, not a driver.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I do.
Well, as you have seen that focus develop at your church, how has your training of different pastors developed over the course of your ministry?
I would not like you to have those fellows in here and ask them that question. And they're really the ones to answer that. I think, the way in which it is developed is, first of all, after about 7 years in ministry here, I realized that I had gone probably further than I ever thought I could, and I had nowhere else to go. In other words, I didn't come with all of the skill sets of, American ministry. I came as a pastor, a sole pastor of a relatively small church in the west of Scotland. So the idea of, for example, having a team was something I'd never known. Therefore, caring for a team or giving direction to the team, all of that stuff, that was all foreign to me. And I actually said to the elders in a non-confrontational setting, I think that I've just about done as much as I can do. I mean, I can keep doing what I'm doing, but I don't know if that's going to work. And I said, I'm really quite incompetent at many of these areas. And of course, some were trying to be kind to me and say, oh, no, you are. And one of the fellows said, I don't think you're incompetent. I think you're lazy. Okay? So I said, well, then I'm going to have to be able to prove my incompetence. And so we set up a mechanism for me to prove my incompetence, which I did. And as a result of that, we then had to make a determination. That is, perhaps I can go...
Can I have you tell me a little bit about this way to prove your incompetence?
Yes.
We can't move too quickly past that. I got to know what that was.
All right. Well, I had run across somebody in my travels who was a sort of bench sitter for the Los Angeles Lakers a long time back. And he was working with a man who was a sort of business/pastoral type organizer, analyzer sort of person who would, in a very objective way, it wasn't like, Jay Adams thing where you find out whether you should get married or not. But it was a similar sort of thing. In other words, he provided an objective tool that could be used to determine, in my case, my level of incompetency. I mean, other things as well. So I said, well, why don't we, I don't even remember the man's name now. He was in Oregon. And very much against my Scottish instincts and everything else in me to expose myself to this because I'm not a fan of that kind of thing, even if I need it. And so that's what happened. And
so it's like a consultant that did like an analysis.
Yeah, objective. It had all kinds of things, squares, circles, triangles, colors, forms. I just filled it all out and I didn't know what he was going to do with it. But he came back and said to my elders, yeah, he's incompetent. Not when it came to opening up the scriptures or giving big picture leadership or establishing vision, but at the nuts and bolts level of things. How does the children's ministry fit in with this? How do you develop this and that? One, I couldn't do it, and two, I didn't want to do it. So there was a measure of the lazy factor in there as well. So we determined either I can move on, and I've got 7 years in me for another place. I can run right up to the tape. Or we can continue with my present level of incompetence. Or we can come around my weaknesses and provide folks who will then fill those significant gaps. And as a result of that, in the goodness of God, right under our noses, in one of my elders, we found that man. And the last 25 years of life here at Parkside, involving the kind of things you're asking about, substantially to his part and his partnership with me, so that, to repeat ourselves, we're better together than any of us are on our own. And I think the reason I got to this was because I was thinking about the difference in personality type. For example, he takes copious notes. We go in elders' meetings and he's got it all written down. I take the minutes from the elders' meeting and trash them when I walk out of the door, which would be folly were it not for the fact that he is my source, you see. And so that's how it's been working.
That's wonderful. So helpful. That complementarity in the team.
Yeah.
Yeah, critical.
Yeah, it's Luther and Melanchthon. If you think how outspoken Luther was, and even with Melanchthon pulling on his coat, going, Martin, I don't think you Martin.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, in your own ministry, how has your preaching changed, and how has it remained the same?
Oh, dear. Well, to come around, I think, hopefully, I have moved away from the very strongly hortatory element in it. And that as a result of starting to really see the way in which the indicatives provide the foundation for the imperatives. And so I think it has changed in that way. I think it has changed also in being shorter. I think it has changed in being far more gospel-centered or even certainly Christ-centered, and I'd like to think going forward it will be even more crucis-centered, that it will be more cross-centered, and not just in pointing to Christ, but in pointing to the Christ who has, borne our sins and our punishment. But I think I've worked in terms of style, if you like, or tone. I have, people around me that I say, will you tell me when I'm getting that dreadful whining thing in my voice, that more that, or whatever it might be, that where, you'll allow your own level of frustration to come through, and it comes out either by, your voice getting higher, or you don't take a breath and you push it towards the end of all of that stuff. With time, I hope that my tone has become far more conversational than it was at the beginning. And I don't mean by conversational just like, quiet talks on prayer or quiet talks on the gospel or something like that. I don't think I'm really capable of quiet talks. But Gary Miller, who's in Brisbane, along with one of his elders, wrote that really good little book on, he wrote a really good little book called Saving Eutychus. I don't know if you've seen it, but essentially what he says is, in Paul's case, it took a substantial time to induce Eutychus to sleep. Unfortunately, says Gary, most of us are capable of doing it, in a much shorter period of time and having people just fall asleep under us. And so they deal with a lot of things in that book, but they deal with pace of delivery, fast, slow, volume, loud, quiet, pitch, high, low. And they don't deal with this, but the one that I add into it is what I refer to just as tone, the tone. What is your tone in here? Is it, I'm very clever and you guys should really listen to me because I am? Or, we got to get the tone from Jesus. I am gentle and lowly in heart. That's what we long for. That's the work of the Spirit of God. So preaching for me, who is it? Taliki, who says, the pulpit draws the preacher the way the sea draws the sailor. To preach, to really preach, is to die naked and to realize as you do that you're going to have to do it again at 6 o'clock in the evening. I don't know who it was that says nobody really knows how to preach, except we'd have to say probably Jesus. And so the idea that it's always sort of out there in front of you is good because it humbles us to the task. The thing I dread more than anything else in that regard is some voice in the back of my head going, you've got this now, Alistair. You've got this. You've conquered this. You know how to do this. And that's where, again, our wives come in because they're going, oh, no, you haven't.
What common theme that I've just seen appear throughout our talk is that, on the one hand, you're balancing a deep sense of who you are and who you aren't. Our modern culture would call it authenticity, but I want to find another word just because I hate hearing that word all the time. But on the other hand, a real openness to feedback. How can I improve? Did I hit that unhelpful pitch last Sunday? Balancing those two things together really comes through.
Well, it's partly, James, isn't it, in that same climate again, where and this is one of the benefits of ministry over the long haul in one place, because your congregation, they know you thoroughly. So they're able to distinguish between, a good Sunday and an average Sunday or a lousy Sunday, if you like. And so they're able to discount the highs and the lows as well. And so is the pastor. But where that climate exists, then there can be that sense of openness. There's a great moment in the tour of the Reagan Library where you can hear Reagan in the earphones, and we're in the Oval Office, and he's describing the circumstances in the Oval Office. And amongst other things, he says, I did not regard this as my office. I regarded it as the office of the people in which I served. And he said, and so I took it very seriously. I never removed my suit coat when I was working in this office. And then he says, you see, it is possible to take the task seriously without taking ourselves too seriously. And I think when we get that the wrong way around, then we're all in difficulty. The danger as pastors is that we take ourselves a little too seriously and don't take the sense of call and responsibility seriously enough.
Do you have advice on how a young pastor, preacher especially, can start to find or develop their own preaching voice, quote unquote, preaching voice?
Well, again, this is going to be very repetitive, but obviously, practice helps. And what I mean by practice is, it's very hard when you're a member of a pastoral team and get to preach only intermittently. even though you may have the opportunity to teach in a smaller study or in a life group or something, that is not the same as the moment when you're thrust into that position. So for myself, it used to scare me so much to death I could hardly get saliva in my mouth when I would preach on the rare occasion at Charlotte Chapel for Derek Prime. But, when you get to a pulpit on your own and you're responsible for 52 weeks of ministry, then you begin to develop something for good or for ill. The danger, role models help or hinder. So we all know the classic stories of people who thought that, if they sounded like Martin Lloyd-Jones, they would be far more effective. When in actual fact, of course, the key is to be yourself and forget yourself, because you don't want to be analyzing, you don't want to be discovering your preaching voice while you're preaching. I don't like to listen to myself. Most people don't. But in the early days, I think you should listen to yourself, because if you don't know what you sound like. And so if you listen to it and you go, oh, goodness gracious. For example, take something like a rising inflection, which is very much a part of, came out of the valley in California and has seeped into life, where the sentence never ends with a finality. It's always, and it drives you insane. Well, if you were to discover something like that, you've got to get rid of that. Or again, the speed. I remember writing to Dick Lucas years ago and saying, would you listen to this cassette tape and just give me your honest feedback? And I never forget it, because he wrote back, "Dear Alistair, slow down. Yours as ever, Dick." That's what he said. Slow down. And I realized, I was just going like an express train. And there was no point where people could catch their breath and so on. I guess the only way you really know, if you're going to choose role models not to copy them, but just to learn from them. So for example, let's take John Stott. What a phenomenal role model of somebody who can take huge pieces of doctrinal material and break them down, or if you like, thread the needle through the text. But he's a Cambridge double first graduate with a supreme intellect, and in terms of his personality, he's so way out there. Well, what can you learn from that? You learn from the fact that he seldom preached for longer than maybe 30, 35 minutes, unless he was in a conference setting. We say, well, that's interesting. Maybe I could knock 10 minutes off the length of this thing and do everybody a favor. We say, yeah, but what about the sort of great Celtic influence of Eric Alexander and his whoa, So I say, well, I want something of the whoa, but I covet that steady ability to just say it, just as the apostle says, Dick Lucas is another guy like that. So you can learn elements from them, I think. And should. And again, it comes back to your wife or your good friends or the people who work around you, and be prepared to say, what's going on here?
I think a real interesting example is Tim Keller. When you listen to him, because everyone, of course, wants to preach like Tim Keller, but when you listen to him, he actually has so many non-fluencies. The technical term for all these things. And it'd be very easy to say, oh, I'll just have a conversation. But I think the important question is, why does that work? Well, for him, in his urban context, that conversational aspect to it works. But it doesn't mean you should use non-fluencies or not prepare. There's a deeper truth to learn.
No, that's right. No, he does that, but it's very disarming to do that. But he actually, remember, he was a teacher there at Westminster in a classroom setting. And, I took classes from Tim. And basically all he does is he walks onto a different platform and does the exact same thing. So he will say things, well, let's put it another way, because it's occurring to him in the moment. Well, he's not saying let's put it another way because he didn't like the way he just put it. He's saying let's put it another way because he thought of another way that's actually better than what he just said, Whereas I say to young guys, you don't start this, well, let me put it another way, or let me try and do that. I said, that's what you're supposed to be doing in your study so you can get to the finished article. And the other thing about Tim is, he can be as conversational as he likes because of the peculiar touch that he has on the ball. I mean, he can pick something up and just turn it at an angle and show you something that you should have noticed yourself but couldn't. No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who said, the key to writing something that's really catchy is to make the obvious seem unusual and the unusual to seem obvious.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds like him, doesn't it? That's how he sold so many books, by little sentences like that. Yeah.
Just wanted to wrap up with this question. As you look to the future of ministry, especially in America, what gives you encouragement?
A quote from J.C. Ryle that I don't have with me, where Ryle is speaking in his day, and he says, do not worry when the pastors of today are taken from us, because God has yet still brighter stars in his firmament, with whom to replace them. And I think that is the encouraging thing, to be able to look around and to see as you travel that you're coming into a context where there are young men who are solidly convinced of biblical theology, solidly convinced that God loves saving people, solidly convinced that in sowing and in planting and in watering, we can rest in the fact that God really does make things grow. And I want to end my run with that mentality. And so I think part of the challenge as you age is guarding yourself from that sort of the glory days were always in the past, or I can't believe that this is going on now, or whatever else it is. And not in a sort of Pollyanna way, but in a genuine way. I've got young guys on my pastoral team. Goodness, they came here in their early 20s, and they're just super, and they're going on terrific. And, they all preach for me, and if I'm not preaching, they preach, and they're finding their voice, and they're learning along the way as well. And so the confidence that I think Paul has when he says, the time has come for my departure. And I'm just passing this off to you, Timothy, and I'm sure that the things that you've learned from me, that you will pass them on in turn until the day when the chief shepherd appears and gathers us all up.
Amen. Dr. Begg, thank you so much for this time.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Join us next time as we talk with Professor Leland Ryken about reading the Bible as literature. In the meantime, visit ministrynetwork.com/degree to learn more about the new online offerings available at Westminster Theological Seminary.